She has one of the most recognizable last names in Virginia politics. Colette McEachin has been a prosecutor in Richmond for more than 3 decades. 6 years ago, the wife of the late Congressman Donald McEachin became the city's first female Commonwealth's attorney. Now she's running for re-election. McEachin's opponent says she's failed when it comes to prosecuting killers and violent criminals. Today, McEachin defends her record and makes a case to voters. Well, welcome back to another edition of Untold. Today I am joined by Colette McEachin, Commonwealth's attorney in the city of Richmond. She is in a battle for re-election. June primary right around the corner.
June 17.
Early voting is still happening.
Started.
Right, yes. Yeah. So it's underway. And I mean, at this point, what is your day-to-day looking like? Do you do campaign events when you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks so much for having me on the podcast first. Yeah. And yes, right now there are 21 days. So today is Tuesday, and 3 weeks from now will be the primary election.
How does that feel?
Like being 3 weeks away from delivering. So
like you know it's coming.
Right,
you're kind of dreading it. You're kind of excited about it.
Exactly,
all the things.
Exactly. All the things. All the things. And I've been running all of this year, and so it's nice to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And hopefully it is not an oncoming train.
Right. Everyone hopes that.
Yeah.
What is the in your mind? I'm sure the distinction between campaigns that you've been in, is there a defining sort of characteristic of this one that you would, I mean, I know people who have run during COVID say, oh, COVID was its own animal and challenges presented, but because you couldn't really reach people weren't out as much. What would you say this election cycle is defined by in your mind, in your memory?
It's interesting that you should bring up COVID because that's when I also was campaigning because it's a 4-year term. So 4 years ago, I was campaigning just at the end of COVID as people were starting to get vaccines, but we're still very careful about people coming up to their door and knocking and reminding them about elections. So this election season has actually been relatively calm.
Yeah.
It's not quite a replay of 4 years ago. But the same guy who ran against me 4 years ago is running against me this year.
Right.
I beat him soundly last year, and my intention is to beat him soundly this year. So hopefully it will be a repeat of 2020 and 2021.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to ask this question. You've held this job a long time, and a lot of times there's people who get tired because it is an exhausting role, and it's all in. I mean, you're managing an office, but you're also managing the city's crime in a way, and you're managing justice. I mean, there's a lot of things that the top prosecutor is responsible for. Why sign up again? Like, why get back in this fight?
So one of my primary goals in the last election campaign was to bring restorative justice to the city of Richmond and to make that something that was well known throughout the city and that was accessible in all of the courtrooms instead of just being accessible in juvenile and domestic relations court.
Spell out what restorative justice actually is. I don't know that everybody listening might know.
Yeah. So I didn't know 5 years ago. So restorative justice is a process that is an alternative to the traditional criminal process. So traditionally, a victim is injured. Somebody's eventually arrested, and then the victim has the Commonwealth Attorney's Office not as their representative, but as their voice in court. The defendant has an attorney, and then the attorneys talk to each other, and the attorneys talk to the judge. And other than the
outside
victim,
of a courtroom,
outside the courtroom and inside the courtroom.
Okay.
And then the only time the victim is allowed to speak, has space to speak, is when he or she is actually put on the witness stand. You talk about what happened, and then if the defendant's found guilty and there's a sentencing, you're allowed to speak at sentencing. But you can never talk directly to the defendant. You can never let the defendant know how hurt you were personally, professionally, emotionally, by what the defendant did. Restorative justice flips that. And so instead of it being focused on punishing the defendant, it's focused on restoring the victim as closely as possible to where he or she was before the crime happened. And so,
Is punishment at all a part of that or not?
well, it
always?
depends on what you mean by punishment.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that's important for all the 40 prosecutors in my office to know is there are a range of punishments. Everyone doesn't need to be imprisoned for 20 years, and everything can't be resolved with restitution and a dismissal, right? So there are a range of things. So for restorative justice, what happens is the person is charged with a nonviolent offense. So we're not going to do restorative justice for a murder, a rape, a sodomy, a child abuse, domestic violence, because then the power dynamics aren't healthy.
Right.
But if it's two neighbors fighting over the parking space and one of them gets really upset and kicks the car and damages it,
right,
that's not something that the criminal justice system and all of its resources should necessarily be involved in. And so if the victim is willing to talk with the defendant and the defendant is willing to talk with the victim, then my office has structured a Richmond Restorative Justice group of individuals in the city. They have been trained to facilitate group conferences. They will meet individually with the victim, individually with the defendant, and then meet with both of them in a neutral setting, and they just facilitate the conversation. Why were you so upset over the car? Why didn't you call me? Can you make the restitution? Can you pay
for the damage?
Right. I need a letter. My child saw this and this is how it's affected him. All of the things that victims don't get to say directly to defendants, restorative justice lets victims do that. And then that way they regain some power, they regain some autonomy, and they get to decide, this is what you need to do to make this situation better. And as long as the defendant does that within a certain amount of time, the charge will be dismissed.
Probably, and I'm sure this is an intended purpose as well, is probably eases the burden on the system as well. Just,
exactly.
There's so many backlogged cases, and I mean,
right.
Rather than, and frankly, money and time and resources and all of the things.
Yes.
I mean, if you can actually have a direct conversation and reach a resolution,
exactly,
it's probably, So how has that been going? I know we have had your opponent in this race has spoken to us as well, and he said that was one of the things he brought up, that it hasn't been as utilized as he would like it to be, that it should have more people involved.
Oh, I agree. It should absolutely have more people involved, and I hope Mr. Barber will recommend that to his current clients, that they should engage in restorative justice, but I doubt it. So one of the things that's distressing for me, aside from the fact that my opponent has only minimal experience actually being a prosecutor, is that he is so insulting to people who are willing to go through that process. I know that he has also spoken very disparagingly about the number of people who take advantage of drug court, or the number of people who take advantage of our behavioral health dockets, which are now in all 3 courthouses in the city of Richmond. And of course, as you said, he is very dismissive of people who have engaged in restorative justice. All of those categories, that's 100 people. That's 100 people who were not otherwise engaged in the traditional criminal justice system, who either reconciled with the person they offended or are getting treatment for the root cause of their criminal behavior, whether it's a mental health issue or an alcohol issue or a drug issue. And for him to say, oh, well, it's not enough people doing that, so we should just get rid of drug courts, we should just get rid of mental health dockets, we should get rid of a whole restorative justice program, we should tell the advocates who have now been trained to do this and bring this out into the community so that hopefully we can prevent a charge from being placed on someone, because the restorative justice process will be there at the beginning as opposed to kind of in the middle after the charge has already been created by the police. I just find that really insulting, and I don't think that that is the type of attitude befitting a Commonwealth's attorney for a city like Richmond.
And you said it should be reaching more people. How do you broaden that outreach? What is the goal, or what's the strategy to get more people to use as the restorative justice process you set up?
Yeah, so at this point, it's really publicity and community buy-in. And I think it's like anything else. Anytime when seatbelts were first imposed, right, and put in cars, most people were, I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. I've been fine not wearing a seatbelt. And now kids know, people know you put a seatbelt on when you get in a car. I remember the days when drinking and driving weren't as frowned upon as they are now. And then Mothers Against Drunk Driving came into being, and they really educated the public about the effects of drunk driving. And so now everyone knows, whether they do it or not, everyone knows you're not supposed to drink and drive. So now that my office has created this Richmond Restorative Justice Group, and restorative policies are known in the court, known by the attorneys, we just need more people to become aware. And so we're now at the publicity phase of that campaign.
Trying to get people to understand that this is an option.
Right. And that it's a option, to your point, that doesn't punish in the traditional sense, but brings a resolution that satisfies the victim. And ultimately, that's what justice is for the victim to be supported and for the victim to have the system
made whole as much as possible.
Exactly.
Given the very interesting. So let me ask you, what do you think in terms of, clearing cases and getting convictions? I've heard many numbers thrown out. One of them, I think, 60% or 70% conviction rate. Do you feel satisfied with the conviction rate as it is right now in your office? Do you feel like you're getting the convictions you want to get on the cases that you need to?
Well, since we recently got 2 life plus convictions, I'm pretty happy about those.
Are we talking about the Huguenot High School case? Or are we talking
No,
about another
that
case?
was not. This is another case that received life. Huguenot High was 25 years.
Okay.
That I did.
You
with
did
2
yourself,
other,
right?
Well, with 2 other very experienced prosecutors, because it was a big case. So am I satisfied? Yes. Once again, because my opponent spent so little time in the office, he was there for less than a year and didn't.
Did you guys overlap?
I was his supervisor.
Oh, interesting dynamic.
I was his
Okay, didn't know that. Okay, so you were his supervisor for
the 10 months that he lasted.
Okay, and that was under Mike Herring?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was one of Mike's deputies.
Okay.
And I was responsible for the general district courts in Richmond, and that's where new prosecutors start out, either in general district court or juvenile and domestic relations court.
Gotcha.
So Tom.
So you guys have a long history.
Well, 7 years.
I mean, short and long, right?
Yeah. We've certainly known each other.
In the office, short, over time, long. Yes.
Exactly. And so, being a prosecutor was not a good fit for him, and I don't think a few years later that being head prosecutor of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office is a better fit. He's not qualified to be Commonwealth's attorney, not only because of his lack of actual experience at any trial level other than the lowest trial level, but because he has not brought any type of gravitas. He has not created anything since he left the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And to your point about the numbers, even those he's getting wrong. So
tell me, what are the numbers?
Okay, so I know since he and I keep having these conversations with different people, I know that he is very flip about tossing out. There have been 10,000 major crimes in the city of Richmond. And what he is not telling people is that 10,000, 9,000 of those cases are property cases, shoplifting, theft from motor vehicle, burglary of a shed, things like that. So no one should have any crime anywhere, but for him to throw out 10,000 major crimes and try to deliberately scare the residents of Richmond into thinking that crime is on the rise when it is not, is a lie. And does not serve him well if he wants to be a Commonwealth attorney that people are going to trust and rely on. So the police chief, Rick Edwards, and I have known each other for 25 years. I watched him kind of grow up from a patrol officer. He watched me grow up from being a young prosecutor. And so we have a lot of trust and respect for each other. And I will tell your listeners that he is very pleased about the fact that Richmond finally cracked the 1,000 number of violent crimes, and we are under 1,000 violent crimes for last year. Obviously, this year is going on. So that 10,000 number, 90% of that is property crimes, and less than 10% is violent crimes. It's things like that where Tom is deliberately, either deliberately not telling people the truth, or has so little actual experience, he doesn't understand what the numbers mean.
Well, it seems that, so sorry, to steer back, so the numbers of conviction rates, what do you consider your conviction rate?
So there's a difference between a conviction rate and a clearance rate.
Clearance is police.
Clearance is police.
Right.
Conviction is my office, the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And we don't chart conviction rates because the point is to obtain justice. And sometimes justice does not require a conviction. It requires something else, like restorative justice. For violent crimes, for crimes involving firearms, then yes, we are going to put the pedal to the metal and go full board. But once again, there are a range of penalties. And so I'm very pleased that over the past 5 months, the beginning of this year, we have won hundreds of years of DOC time, felony time, for various murders, manslaughter, vehicular involuntary manslaughter, those types of things. So we have a great group of 40 attorneys, probably a little over half of whom had been with the office at least 5 years, if not longer, going up to people who've been with the office for 20 or 25 years. So we have young prosecutors who we are training to handle those more serious cases. And because I've been able to keep that group together, we have a great group of experienced prosecutors who can handle the homicides, the rapes, the robberies, the vehicular manslaughter cases. So I'm very pleased with where the office is. I'm very pleased with the variety and diversity of prosecutors that are in the office.
The violent crime conviction rate, or the ones with guns, do we have a number on that? I know I'm going back to it, but I just still haven't heard you say a number, so I got to ask.
Yeah. So I don't know what that number is, and it would be something that would be difficult to determine, because when you say conviction, are you meaning someone, just as a question, are you meaning someone was charged with a
violent crime? So if the police are clearing, let's say,
they cleared 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So once again, Tom's wrong.
Yeah. So if they're clearing 80% of the, and obviously people can understand the difference that, getting an arrest,
that's probable cause,
right,
as opposed to proving something beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Yes.
So there's a different, burden of proof there. But I don't think they would ever expect those numbers to be identical. But if they're clearing 80%, then what percent of those violent crimes are convictions? Yeah.
Most of them. I don't know what the number is.
Yeah.
But most of them.
Yeah. So you're satisfied. You feel like you've got, I know it's difficult in terms of reliable witnesses and witnesses who want to participate in the criminal justice system, frankly. I think there's people,
don't want to don't want to participate.
That's what I mean. Yes, right.
Yeah.
People that are willing to show up that can really hurt a case. I just wonder, in your mind, do you feel, as you look forward about the work that you will want to do in the future, what needs to be tackled in those areas?
So if I was queen of the world If I was queen of the world.
You'd have to rival me for the seat.
Oh, that's fine. My crown's bigger than yours. My crown's going to be bigger than yours. I would get rid of guns, and I would try to figure out why, aside from the easy access to guns, so many of the shootings in Richmond, whether they end in a death or not, involve an argument. It's just an argument.
Is that a pattern you see over and over again?
Absolutely.
That it started with some kind of confrontation that could not be resolved?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one or both parties had a gun.
Yeah.
And somebody brought it out and started waving it around or pointed it at somebody, and then the other person went and got his gun, and now we've got two people with firearms, amped up,
and unable to
unable to self-regulate and bring themselves down.
Right.
And so,
seems like a problem society faces, frankly, about like how do we get more regulated, right? Because more and more people just turn to this as the answer.
You're right. And just the I think you as a commentator see that with how people respond to simple questions, or how it's difficult sometimes to even have a conversation with someone, because as soon as they see that you don't agree with them 100% or something, it's, well, then you're the devil. You're unpatriotic. You don't care about X, Y, and Z. And I thought we were just having a conversation. And so I will say, out of the 56 homicides that occurred in Richmond in 2024, 23 of them were based on an argument or domestic violence. So almost half. Yeah. So, I've been here long enough to see when drugs were a big motivator of violent crime, when gangs were a big motivator of violent crime. There is some of that now. Drugs continue to be a problem, even though fentanyl deaths are down. But it's people with access to guns who can't control themselves.
So what is the solution to that? I mean, how does someone in your position affect that all the way down to the person who's unable to calm themselves down in an argument?
So it starts off in juvenile court, right? So one of the policies that my office has, along with working with the court services unit, which is essentially like juvenile supervision and probation, is if you are a juvenile under the age of 18 and you have a firearm, you're going to be on supervised probation. And that means that there are going to be a lot of resources and services and check-ins, not only for you, but for your family. Because obviously, there's a question about how were you able to get a gun as a 13-year-old, as a 15-year-old, as a 17-year-old. And then, assuming that your parents didn't know, what do you need to know? What do they need to know so that you don't go further off the path? So
trying to intercept at the early point, because you feel like that's really where the biggest impact can occur down the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because we know as adults that it's hard to get another adult to do something they don't want to do. Right.
Well, and then the habit's been formed over years, and you have to break it.
Exactly. And you think it's the norm. That's what happens in your neighborhood. That's how you see your big brother or your father or your uncle acting. Since generally a lot of the people who carry firearms are men, I'm just going to say he. You think it's manly. You think it makes you powerful. You think it makes you scary. And you want that. The testosterone in your body is just, making you make some bad choices along with other things. So so we try to address that initially in the juvenile domestic relations court. If you turn 18 and you have a firearm, then you're going to end up being convicted of a firearms charge. And what most people don't know is brandishing a firearm is just a misdemeanor. Discharging a gun in the city of Richmond, that's just a misdemeanor. A concealed weapon, it's just a misdemeanor. And so when people say, oh, throw the book at them, if you were convicted of a misdemeanor brandishing a firearm, concealment, discharge, if you were convicted, and if a judge was willing to give you 12 months in jail, you would only serve 6 months. And so it's a difficult situation to manage. And so what my office tries to do is intervene as early as possible, provide resources so that people are not still using firearms inappropriately when they're adults. And then if they are doing that, convict them of that charge.
Well, I definitely think, guns are a top. It seems that the police chief has made that very, very clear that, the gun violence is a top priority of his as well. So I know you two have been working hard on that.
Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect point to take a quick break, and we will be right back. So, Colette, we were talking before we got started about your beloved husband, Donald, who passed away in 2022.
Yeah, November,
battle with cancer. And I actually had the benefit of knowing him and interviewing him on several stories. I was a reporter here in Richmond in 2009, and he was in the state Senate at that point. And as I was telling you, he was a very friendly voice in the media. He would always take my calls and say, "Sure, come on over." And I'd say, "I know this is last minute. I have this deadline and I need a soundbite on X, Y, and Z law." And whatever the law was, he could just rip and run. Like he would pull some legal context out of his head and give me a great interview. I really, I always enjoyed working with him. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I think it's so interesting that both of you had these extraordinary political careers. Tell me about that. Where did you meet, first of all?
UVA Law School.
I thought so. I was looking at both of your bios thinking that must have been where you
it all
collided.
happened. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And did you both know then that you wanted careers in politics, or did that unveil itself later?
So Donald knew, and when we started, he was a year behind me in law school, and law school's 3 years. So I remember watching him come in with some friends, and you're just kind of checking out the new guys and the new class. And we became friends at UVA. The Black Law Students Association is a relatively small, tight-knit group, and went to parties together, and then our friendship deepened over time. And he made it clear when we were dating that he was a Richmond boy, he loved Richmond, and that he was going to come back to Richmond and run for office. And initially he said, I want to be the first Black president of the United States of America. And so he's telling me this in the 80s, and I'm thinking, well, that's a nice pipe dream, but everybody's got to have a goal. But since I was a year ahead of him in law school, I graduated. I went to work for a firm in Atlanta. He was still in Richmond. And I kind of thought, well, that was a lovely little law school relationship.
Romance,
right,
maybe,
exactly. Yeah. And then we just kept talking and talking and talking. And so eventually I moved back to Richmond, I moved to Richmond, back to Virginia. And he graduated and went to work for a couple of private firms here in Richmond. And then he and Donald G. opened up McEachin and G.
Right. That's where I used to interview him.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's where he ran for office. But he knew in law school that he was going to run for office.
Yes.
I did not at all. At all.
No. And what was your experience going through those campaigns? Because sometimes even being married to someone who is on that campaign circuit of like every few years, you got to gear up, you got to do fundraising, you got to do events, you got to talk to people. You got to be just on a lot. Yeah. You know what I mean? You can't ever, your moments of like downtime and being yourself are just get smaller and smaller sort of the higher you go.
Right.
What was it like being married to somebody that was sort of in that spotlight all the time?
So there were good things and bad things. So to your point, he was gone a lot.
Yeah.
And we had 3 children and a house and dogs and turtles and cats and things like that. So, and I had a full-time job that was somewhat stressful.
Right. I was about to say you weren't sitting around. You were busy. Yeah.
So juggling all that was difficult. But at the same time, I got to meet lots of great people through him and because of him, and then the same from him to me. And I just saw how much he enjoyed it. He really deeply believed that the government was here to help people, and it was his job, as whether in the House of Delegates or in the Senate or in Congress, ultimately his job was to solve problems and help people get whatever it was that they needed. And so we synced on that, and when Mike Herring, the previous Commonwealth's attorney called me into his office and said, I'm going to be resigning in the middle of my term, and I want you to be the interim Commonwealth's attorney. It was a complete shock to me. It was a complete shock because I was happy being the deputy. I was happy training young attorneys. I was happy doing my felony sexual assault caseload and my robbery caseload. And everything was at a good place in my life. And so to become the head of the agency was life-changing.
So you sort of didn't actually necessarily choose the political path. It kind of chose you at that moment.
Right.
And did you have your own education in politics once you got into it? Or were you sort of aware of the game watching your husband all those years?
I was minimally aware. I really was not that involved in Donald's campaigns because I was taking care of the house and the dogs and the children and everything.
Right.
So I would kind of show up when he needed me to do something or be there with him, but I was not involved on a granular level with the campaign. So learning how to be the candidate, learning how much money it costs to run a campaign, learning about all of the time it takes to connect with all the people who you want to connect with is a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that at this point in my life, my kids are grown up.
Right. You can just focus.
And I can focus on the citizens of Richmond and what they need and what I can give them in this office.
Did he give you any advice or was there any moment where he's like, okay, we're both in this together now? He must have been pretty proud of you.
He was very proud. Yeah, he was. And so I'm glad that Mike passed the baton to me in the summer of 2019.
Yeah.
And I had a firehouse primary against an opponent, and I won that. And then I served out the rest of Mike's term until 2020, and then my current opponent ran against me then.
Right.
So within 18 months, I had 2 elections.
Right.
And Donald was starting to not be well, but he was really energized in seeing me kind of carry on the McEachin mantle, and be more active and engaged in public service as an actual candidate as opposed to someone helping someone else do it. So he was very, very happy for me.
Yeah. Well, did he ever give you any words of wisdom or little pearls from his own experience, like, Colette, don't ever do this or don't ever say that? Was there anything that he had such a legendary rise. I mean, like when you said he wanted to be president, that does not surprise me. And I mean, he got to Congress. He was a couple clicks away. Yeah. So maybe he just ran out of time, but he seemed to have a calm about him that maybe who knows if it was real. He might have been stressed out underneath, but you didn't know it. I mean, he was always like, he just seemed like nothing fazed him. Like he just kind of had the whole thing under control. You know what I mean? I don't know if that was your vibe or.
So that shows how good a person and politician he was. That is how he presented to you. Yeah.
Was he less than that at home? Was he ever nervous or frenetic?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, then he was good at it.
Yeah. No, he had all the regular feelings about, will I be reelected? Every election is not a given.
Right.
And so will I be reelected? Will this policy that I want to begin or carry out, will it be received by the voters? How do I get to all of these different places? And by the time he was in Congress, his district stretched from basically Azalea Mall to the North Carolina border.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's a lot of traveling to do. I would say his pearl of wisdom to me that I remember is when you are in public service, no matter how hard the job is, always lead with hope. Let your constituents know that things are improving, things will get better, and how you're going to make things better for them. That's what people want to know and hear. Right. And so that's what I do in my office.
Yeah. I imagine you lost him in 2022, and that was, just about halfway through your term, that term. And I just wonder how you balanced the grief with the job. Was it, he's, like I said, the force. So I'm sure that left a huge hole.
It did, and it still does.
Yeah.
It's interesting to be in Richmond where there's so many memories of our life together, as young parents, and then parents of teenagers, and then parents of college students, and then eventually a grandparent with my perfect 3-year-old grandson.
Perfect.
And so I'll cross the Nickel Bridge, and I'll think about the time I came, and he told me, why it was called the Nickel Bridge, because that's how much the toll was at the time. And I remember the first time we posed for pictures at the War Memorial. So Memorial Day is always kind of like, oh yeah, I remember when we were there and taking pictures with the kids. So it's bittersweet. I'm glad that I'm here in Richmond because there are so many good memories. But it was difficult at the time because he left such a big hole. And the good thing about my job is I have such a good office and such a dedicated group of prosecutors that I didn't have to worry about a case slipping through or something bad happening to a victim or someone not doing something they should have done or not done. Because I have such great deputies and supervisors that I knew I could take the time to grieve. And then once that time had passed, I, was back in the swing of things, and that led to Amari Pollard and the Huguenot High shooting.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes as devastating as those cases can be, having a focus and a distraction and just something to throw the energy into
exactly.
kind of helps move forward. I'm sure that's been difficult because your job is stressful and doesn't really wait for you.
No,
you know what I mean?
No.
Things keep happening.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those memories with us, and this is another great spot to just take a quick break. We'll be right back. Well, Colette, tell me in the worst case scenario, if in fact this election doesn't go your way, what will be your next steps? Would you consider running for another office? Would politics be the path, or would you focus more on law? What do you think?
I don't know, honestly.
Haven't considered that option?
Haven't considered that because I intend to win. So so I have not considered that. I don't know what my answer would be to that question.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there are people in political circles that would certainly be looking at you for things. Would you say you're open to a career in politics? Like something more like a delegate or a Senate seat, something in those?
That's not anything I'm contemplating now at all. I will say that after Donald passed, a number of people either assumed or asked, like, are you going to run for his seat, and just kind of go into it the way a lot of spouses do when their spouse dies who's in office. And I had no interest in that. And then people asked if I would run for mayor or run for other offices in the area. And I really feel my best and highest purpose is to be the Commonwealth Attorney for the city of Richmond. That is where I can affect the most change, where I can do the most, where I have the most authority, because it's a constitutional office. So I don't answer to the mayor.
Right.
I don't answer to the chief of police.
Right.
I don't answer to the attorney general. I don't answer to the governor. I don't answer to the president.
Right.
I don't answer to ICE. And so thank goodness for the Virginia Constitution and that authority to just focus on providing public safety for the residents of Richmond.
And it sounds to me like you're attached to the law. It sounds to me like that would be what you'd give up, right? I mean, if you were to fill his seat, I mean, you'd be passing laws, right? But it's not exactly the same.
It's not.
I mean, you're a lawyer in trade.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And I didn't know this, but when Donald became a member of Congress, he had to give up his legal practice.
Yeah.
So other people who are in other professions, medical profession, architect, they can keep their practice and be in Congress. Donald had to give up his legal practice. So having, gone through law school for 3 years and then taken the bar, that's a lot to give up to not be able to have that.
Right. Well, in the future, then opposite scenario, you do hold on to your seat and have the power that the Constitution grants you. What is the top priority in your next go-round?
So just as restorative justice was the main focus, or one of the main focuses for the past 4 years, the next is a family justice center. And I don't know if you've heard that phrase or that. So this is so exciting. So right now, so there is a family justice center that exists in Norfolk, Virginia. And one of the things that I created was a community justice reform unit in my office to deal with community engagement, helping set up the restorative justice, Richmond Restorative Justice organization and other things. And a woman named Kelly Burnett is the head of that. She's a deputy Commonwealth attorney. And she and Rupa Murthy, who is the CEO of the YWCA, told me about the Family Justice Center. And that is a one-stop shop for victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, elder abuse, and child abuse. And instead of a situation where a woman finally has the courage or the desperation to leave her abusive husband, boyfriend, whatever, instead of her having to figure out, where am I going to sleep? How am I going to feed the kids? What departments do I need to go to? How do I let the school know that we're temporarily homeless so they'll look out for my kid? How do I deal with the strangulation marks and get medical attention for the bruising and the strangulation? Instead of her having to figure out, how do I get from MCV to the courthouse to get a protective order to DSS and City Hall while I have my 2 or 3 kids with me, one building, representatives from all of those offices are in the building. She just goes to that one place, and all of those services wrap around her.
That is exciting.
I'm so excited about this.
I'll just tell you, as a reporter who has covered many juvenile and domestic cases, I find that court process and just the system in general so convoluted and difficult to navigate. As a reporter, like, I'm not in danger. You know what I mean?
You're
I can't,
not stressed.
Right.
You're not traumatized.
I don't have children that may not be in my custody. I mean, all the things that, all those outside stresses. So I remember covering those court systems and being like, how can anyone? I can't even tell what building or where the hearing is happening. I mean, it was just. It's like it's
Byzantine almost.
Yeah, as you said, like disjointed. There's one thing over here, one thing over here, and when you're in the
crisis.
trauma yourself, it's got to be impossible to navigate.
Yeah.
So how has Norfolk's done? Has that been really helpful for them?
Norfolk's has been really well, has done really well. They started right before COVID. I think they've moved to I think they're in their 3rd building now. And the good thing about Norfolk and and Norfolk is just one in Virginia. I think there are over 150 family justice centers in the United States and throughout the world. So it's not an unknown, and I think that's going to be helpful to Richmond getting one.
Do you feel like you have support or momentum for that?
Yes, very much so, very much so. So we've had a couple of community forums, we've had focus groups, and so I want to spread the word that if anyone is interested in being on the ground floor and making sure that either their organization is represented and can provide services, or if they have been in that situation and they want to tell us from that lived experience, look, this would be really helpful for you to have or do or not have or do, then, certainly contact my office or contact the YWCA.
You think that's something you could achieve over this term?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
I mean, it's going to take some sweat and tears, I'm sure, but
everything worthwhile does.
Yeah, that's a very interesting.
Very energized about.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. And I, as you were saying it, I was like recalling all of the cases that and those are always the most difficult to track.
Yes,
it's just
and to part of the public safety point that is the basis of my office. Violence that occurs in families leads to violence that occurs out in the street, right, or out in the school. So if we can, through this Family Justice Center, deal with that internal family domestic violence, then maybe that child doesn't feel like he needs to have a gun to protect his mother, has the gun on his person, ends up doing exactly.
Fascinating. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for stopping by, Colette. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and best of luck.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so
I
much.
appreciate it.
We'll see you next time on Untold. Untold is a production of WTVR CBS 6, executive produced by Mike Bergazzi and Katie Beck, directed by Nick Maharaj and Brock Taylor, and edited by Curtis Akers. Follow the show on Instagram at Untold_WTVR.
I'm Rich Marr, host of the VPM podcast, RVA's Got Issues.
Power grid outages.
There was that water crisis that happened.
More housing?
At least you should get paid $15 an hour. At least.
Download it wherever you get your podcasts.